There are no easy victories in the National. There are no easy victories in the National Hockey League. Tonight, the Edmonton Oilers learned that lesson the hard way.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This is my fourth NHL season as a host here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your team covered every single day. Today's episode of Locked On Oilers is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app today. Place your first $5 bet for a chance at winning $300 in bonus bet. So on today's show, we are going to walk through the various stages of this game. We're going to start out our opening segment talking about the idea of game impacts, why the flow of the game is so important, and why momentum, though not tangible, not something you can calculate, you can feel. Our second segment, we will pivot to the bright side. What worked for the Oilers tonight, what I am optimistic about, what I am excited about based on game one. And then in our final segment, we will do a little overreactions to one game. So to start things out, and I'd like to talk about these things in the bigger picture, in the aggregate, because I think there's a greater conversation to be had. I find it really compelling to think about how hockey games unfold. So much of hockey games are rooted in the flow of that individual game. For example, how close are the referees calling infractions? How tight are players checking? Is this more of a cycle and grind? Is this more of a carry in and try and create off the rush? And you have to pick and choose. And something as I've gotten older that I've really gained an appreciation for in every sport, but I would say in hockey and in soccer in particular, is knowing when to pick your spots, is knowing when you need to go for it. And I find it really compelling to watch a 60-minute game where there are shifts and guys who are out there on the ice, busting their butt, highest level of hockey in the world, know the best they're going to do that sequence is get the puck 200 feet, do a flyby, and try and prevent the other team from going the other way. And there's no shame in that. Everybody has to do that during some course of the game. But I find it so interesting that as good as players are at this level, that there need to be these shifts that are effectively concessions, and how those bleed over into each other starts to paint the picture of a game. When are you going to start to take your chances? When are you going to start to make some pushes as far as offense? Or maybe you're going to stay passive. You're going to be a little more skewed towards your defense, and you're going to try and keep everything in front of you. And getting to the game tonight, the Oilers came out of the gate about as good as you can. I was thoroughly impressed by what I saw in the first 5-10 minutes of the game. Once the Oilers got past the first 5 minutes, it felt like they had started to settle in. The lines were getting into a nice flow. I really liked what I saw from the Kasperi-Kapanen line tonight, which was arguably the Oilers' best on the forecheck. They did a really nice job of hitting Flames players along the boards, of forcing turnovers, of prolonging offensive zone time. Because if your third line or your fourth line can just buy you time, and that's what I mean when I say concede that you're not going to try and create some dangerous offense. And I love watching real grinders get to work. So when you have that capacity to have McDavid and Draisaitl playing together at 5-on-5, tonight we saw them play together on the penalty kill and, of course, on the power play, there does need to be other guys on the team. And that kind of creates this, I don't want to say hectic environment, but at the very least, it asks you a question. Because the Oilers are going to be a work in progress a lot this year. There are so many new faces. There are so many guys playing with each other that have not played with each other before. I don't want to say it's a guarantee, but it's pretty straightforward as to why the Oilers got clunky tonight. They felt good about their game at 3-0. And then slowly but surely, they start to crack. They start to fray. And I am not one to make snap conclusions, especially being that the Oilers have had so much roster turnover. But that Matvei Gridin goal, the first goal Calgary scores, that is a goal that is extremely deflating. The Oilers are dominating the game at this point. They're out shooting Calgary almost 2-1. They are leading the game 3-0. They have done pretty much everything right up until this point. They are getting pucks in deep. They are spending significant time in the offensive zone. They are not turning the puck over in their own end. There aren't a lot of neutral zone turnovers. The Oilers are playing a very straight line, simple game. I thought for the first 30 minutes or so, the Oilers were playing some of the best hockey I had seen them play in the regular season in quite a while. I was very impressed with what I saw from David Tomasek, who looked the part of being an NHL regular, somebody who Chris Knobloch very clearly has a high affinity for, someone who played a lot of minutes in multiple situations, somebody who got on the overtime in the 4-on-3 at the end in place of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins at first to set up a one-timer with the right-handedness. I really liked what I saw from Mike Howard. I don't want to jump too far ahead to the second segment, things I was impressed with or liked from the game tonight. But I think the Oilers, by virtue of being such a veteran team, and I know that it's younger than last year. I think they said it on the broadcast, they're the 8th oldest team in the NHL as opposed to the 1st oldest. But this is a team that feels it has the capacity to handle any type of adversity. That because they have Connor, because they have Leon, they have the capacity to do things other teams don't. And that line of thinking is a little presumptuous. It can bite you in the butt the way it did tonight, where the Oilers played a decent game, but on the three goals the Flames scored an actual play and not the shootout, all of them are products of mistakes. All of the Flames goals in this game are products of direct Edmonton mistakes. And generally speaking, that's going to be the nature of scoring in today's NHL. It is as good a league as it's ever been. Goal scorers, when you give them chances, whether that's a moving goalie, whether that's a cross-seam pass, a power play, if you give guys chances to beat you, they're going to take you up on it. You know, you think about SpongeBob, Plankton telling SpongeBob, give it to him, and SpongeBob handing over the ice cream. I wouldn't say the Oilers gave this game away, but they absolutely started to get in their own heads. And the Stuart Skinner goal, and obviously Skinner didn't score on himself, but that's effectively what happens there on that goal where him and Bouchard both brain fart simultaneously. And we know Stuart Skinner is not the most durable goalie when it comes to bouncing back from those types of stinkers. We know Evan Bouchard is liable to a mistake, but you have that. You have the Flames power play goal, and then you have that first one, the one that directs in directly off Noah Flip. At that point, I want to see the Oilers respond. And look, candidly, I thought they were fine down the stretch in regulation. In overtime, they had multiple chances to score in the 4-on-3. Dustin Wolf's good. I hate to really absolve the Oilers of a lot of blame in this game because there's plenty to go around. Anytime you blow a 3-0 lead, you definitely deserve a bit of ire. But at the same time, Dustin Wolf's a really good goalie. And the Oilers, by virtue of believing in themselves, having confidence, maybe got a little overconfident in this game. And those little mistakes started to pile up. Those little mistakes were ultimately their undoing. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. After this break, I'm going to tell you why, even though the Oilers lost, there were still some things to feel good about. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Because right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down the first $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use on the FanDuel app. I love using FanDuel because it makes however you want to play easy. If you want to put together a parlay for a squad ride together and watch the game, really easy. If you're tired of picking the games and you just want to pick player props, FanDuel's got you. Or if you're watching the game happen in real time and you feel the momentum shifting, live betting makes it happen. Going into the game on Wednesday, I had bet Draisaitl over 1.5 points, which was a first period lock, second period lock, and I was very grateful. Leon, money respecter, even if the Oilers aren't bedtime respecters. If you want to get in on the fun, FanDuel has one question. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started for your chance at $300 in bonus bets. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. Anybody who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Even after a tough loss like that, I am happy that hockey is back. I am happy that I get to watch Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Evan Bouchard. I get to watch the boys cook, and the Oilers put together a really interesting lineup. I liked what I saw from a vast majority of the Oilers. I thought the Oilers, in theory, worked out really nicely. Now, there were some things to point out that weren't great. The Mangiapane, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Matthew Savoie line really struggled at 5-on-5. But for the most part, everything worked as designed. Howard, Henrique, and Tomasek were really good at 5-on-5. Trent Frederick did his job with McDavid and Draisaitl. I really liked what we got from Podkolzin and Kapanen and Noah Philp. At a certain point, I want to see the Oilers find their gear. And look, it's game number one. Our goal, and I said this when I was talking with somebody the other day about how to evaluate games this early. One game is pretty inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. Now, there are certain underlying factors, there are certain energies you can pick up and you want to monitor. But the way I look at it and the way I think about these early season games, are we watching the team figure it out? And that's very broad, that's very blanket. So let me elaborate. Over the course of the next 9.5 months, which is how long it would be if the Oilers were to make it to the end of June again to play in the Stanley Cup final, every single guy on this team is going to need to have at least one moment over the course of 82 regular season games and 4 playoff series. That is just the nature of hockey, the season being so long, the rosters being designed the way they are, having 18 players and 2 goalies. With that in mind, you need to start making your incremental progress now. I said it last week, and I'll repeat it now. Your capacity to win the Stanley Cup, it's already started. And just like there are height restrictions on the roller coaster, there are certain benchmarks a team needs to hit along the way over the course of a regular season to eventually have the capacity to pursue a championship. And the Oilers showed you a really interesting configuration. And I was a little skeptical, and frankly still am a little skeptical about playing Connor and Leon together full time. I think that should be reserved for situations where the team is struggling to score, if they're trailing late in a game, if they're on a power play situation, of course. But at 5-on-5, and I do think once Zach Hyman returns, we will see the Oilers distribute McDavid and Draisaitl a little more evenly. We won't see them together as much. But I think for right now, I get the point. The main idea, and Chris Knobloch, to his credit, wants to win those 15 to 16 minutes of 5-on-5 hockey, guaranteed. In his supposition, if he has that, and he has 2 lines capable of really grinding, really cycling, really minimizing his defense, it's going to put you in a position to make things happen. And Connor and Leon had ample chances to make things happen down the stretch. David Tomasek had ample opportunities. I really liked the opportunities afforded to Tomasek. Now, would I prefer if those had been for Matthew Savoie or Ike Howard? Of course. I think the Oilers have more capital. I think there's more runway for those younger guys to hit the ground running. But Tomasek, by being 29 years old, being an NHL rookie, the Oilers want to see if they have a guy. And anytime you sign one of these European free agents, somebody who's got 5-10 years of experience over there. And Tomasek had played in North America in junior hockey, but anytime you're signing those types of players, it really goes one of 2 ways. They either bounce back to Europe in short order, or they put something magical together. You know, the comparison I would give, of course, Zuccarello was a lot younger when he came over after the 2010 Olympics to the Rangers, but Matt Zuccarello is your ideal outcome here. You know, 50, 60-point guy, a little bit of upside, a little bit of flash, the occasional splash play, but to see him, to see Howard, to see Savoie, to see Alec Regula, to see Ty Emberson, to see the Oilers affording their younger pieces, or in the case of Tomasek, their unproven pieces, to see that all come together, it was a little satisfying. You know, I had talked about it a few weeks ago that there needs to be meaning to the regular season. There needs to be more than just wins and losses, the grind of trying to win a Stanley Cup. I can get emotionally invested in the development of these guys. I can get invested in if Kasperi Kapanen and Vasily Podkolzin can continue to build off of what they gave the Oilers last year. I was really impressed by what the Oilers got from that Kapanen line. And it's really simple. When you have lines down your lineup with the capacity to play in the offensive zone, to cycle the puck along the perimeter, and then on occasion, like we were talking about in that first segment, make that push, drive the net, put pressure on the defense, put pressure on the goalie, try and draw a penalty. And in the course of a game, there are going to be stretches where the Flames are going to make a push and commiserate ones where the Oilers are going to make a push. And the Oilers did not look talent deficient. And coming into the season, I had expressed extreme skepticism about this forward group. I felt it lacked established talent. I felt it was banking a lot on unproven guys. And at least for one night, the Oilers forward group looked the part. I think, other than a couple little mistakes, and we'll talk about that in the second segment, I thought the defense had a nice game too. Frankly, other than the one stinker Skinner gives up because him and Bouchard just absolutely brain farted each other, I thought Skinner had a couple of really nice saves in this game too, but that's the nature of hockey. In these 60-minute contests, in the case of tonight's game, 65 minutes in a shootout, you're going to have those little sequences where mistakes or outright brain farts are going to decide games. And to their credit, the Flames looked the part of a spoiler. Their style of play is simple. It is boring. They get pucks on the net. Their young guys have a bit of tenacity in them. Their young guys have a bit of stupid pride in them is the way I would describe it. Guys who don't realize they're not supposed to be playing well. Guys who don't realize that the team maybe doesn't necessarily have the most talented group. But the Flames went out there, and it took them a while. Don't get me wrong. But as soon as they got that first goal from Gridden, they got their feet under them. And then you get a power play goal, and then you get the stinker where Stuart Skinner just absolutely forgets how to play goalie. And you've swung the game, and you hang around, and you survive the 5-minute push at the end of regulation. And yeah, you don't score on the power play, but you live long enough to get to the overtime. You kill off the penalty in the overtime, the 4-on-3, where McDavid and Draisaitl had ample opportunities to win that game. Tomasek had the one really good chance in tight on his backhand. And there's a saying from, I think it's Ocean's 11, where Matt Damon and George Clooney go down the elevator shaft and they're looking at the two security guards who are holding guns, and the power goes out and they sneak up on the security guards, and George Clooney's pulling a remote out of his pocket, and he looks at the remote and he's pressing the button to set off something in the other room. And Matt Damon says, "You check the batteries?" And George Clooney checks the batteries, takes them out, and he says, "You lose concentration in this game for 1 minute, people get hurt." That's what happened to the Oilers tonight. They lost concentration on a handful of sequences, and that was the difference between winning and losing. In today's NHL, the margins have never been smaller. The Flames almost certainly are not a playoff team, but they have enough guys to make things interesting, and those are the teams that will sneak up on you if you give them opportunities. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Coming up next, I'm going to tell you what I hated from the Oilers' performance tonight. Hint, not all that much. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out, making Locked On Oilers their first listen of their Thursday. If you're on the way to school, on the way to work, at the gym, on the run, whatever you're doing this Thursday morning, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to put Locked On Oilers in the rotation. And look, I know coming into a show after a loss is a little deflating. I know you probably want a little bit of the why. You want me to console you, tell you why it's okay. And look, it's one game. The Oilers' expectations are really high. And the first thing I wrote down on my notepad, actually, and yes, we're back to doing the physical notes on a legal pad as opposed to on my iPad. Something about it a lot more satisfactory on my brain. What I wrote, the first thing I wrote when I was doing pregame stuff, when I was jotting the lineups down on my note sheet there, I wrote, with great power comes great responsibility. Of course, that was Uncle Ben talking to Spider-Man, talking to Peter Parker. And that's what the Oilers have here. They have the best player in the world. They have the third or fourth best player in the world. This is a fan base that is amongst, if not the single most loyal entity in the entire NHL. That building is full. That building is loud. That building is expensive. And Oiler fans show up. There is an expectation that when you pull that Oiler sweater over your head, you are going to go out there and assume the mantle. You are going to join the lineage of, and look, I don't think Kasperi Kapanen is thinking about Glenn Anderson or Yari Curry. But to me, on the outside looking in, as somebody who is absolutely fascinated with the culture of hockey, I look at it as you have a personal responsibility anytime you're representing that team to go out there and give it your best. And the one caveat I will give to that, there is a difference between being outplayed and a difference between making mistakes. Now, getting outplayed can lead to mistakes, and I do think that's an entirely fair assessment, but the Oilers had a handful of lapses in this game that ultimately swing the game in Calgary's favor. And some of that is just a product of the flow of the game. Calgary gets 2 goals in 2.5, 3 minutes. Suddenly everyone on the Oilers pins and needles, and you're trying not to make a mistake. The more you're thinking about not making a mistake, the more you're incentivized to play a bit less dangerous of offensive hockey. You're not pushing the ice as much. You're not getting as good of offensive chances. And I felt my one real critique, and this is not a particularly damning indictment of the Oilers, I don't think they pushed hard enough once they got to that 3-0 lead. And I know the 2 Calgary goals happen in 2 minutes, and it's hard to get your feet back under you. But the Oilers needed some of those shifts they had in the first period that were just prolonged offensive zone time, that were cycles, not even particularly dangerous offensively, but just putting a little bit of pressure on the Calgary defense, putting a little bit of pressure on Dustin Wolf, and trying to get game control. Now, game control, of course, famously does not indicate you're going to win. The Oilers had the majority of game control tonight. When you go and look under the hood at 5-on-5, the Oilers had a majority of the scoring chances. They had 54%. They had 64% of the shots on goal. They had 63% of the high danger chances. They had 63% of the expected goals. They only had 1 goal for at 5-on-5. That tells you a story. That tells you the Oilers could not get some bounces at even strength. It tells you maybe they didn't create as much dangerous offense as you would like. The more dangerous offense you create, the more likely you are to convert those chances into actual goals. And then, I said it before and I'll say it again, give Calgary credit. That is a hockey team that has adopted a runt of the litter mentality, that knows they aren't as talented as a lot of the teams they're going to come up against, but there are some young guys who have something to prove, guys like Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee, who have a bit of a chip on their shoulder for being dumped from a Flyers organization that had formerly made it seem like perhaps they were building blocks towards an eventual winner in Philadelphia. You have Dustin Wolf, who has really looked the part. And that's the danger. And I talk about this idea a lot of the team that doesn't know they're not supposed to be good. The most textbook examples, of course, being the replacements team with Keanu Reeves, the Major League team with Charlie Sheen. And I'm not saying the Flames are in those categories. The Flames have talented players. Blake Coleman is a really good hockey player, as is Kadri, as is Uyghur, as is Rasmus Anderson, and of course, as is Dustin Wolf. But the Oilers needed to find a couple shifts here, and that's the difference. I'm not saying tonight's effort was unacceptable. It was bad. They had a couple shifts not go their way, and it swung the game. A couple of individual isolated mistakes unwound their position. Now, I think you'll learn a lot. And of course, it's only one game. And I was going to say, I think you'll learn a lot about this group and Chris Knobloch's view of this group based on the way he assembles the lineup for Saturday's game against the Canucks. Now, we'll have an episode for you on Monday covering the game. I'll probably get a short out after the game Saturday night. But when you think about it, you lose 4-3 in a shootout. You go 8 rounds in the shootout. This was a game begging to be won. This was a game begging for the Oilers or the Flames to take it. And the Flames had a handful of things go their way, and that's what swings it. So if you want to go glass half full, you can say the Oilers played really well. The first two, you could argue all three of the Calgary goals are kind of fluky. And then the shootout's not even hockey. If you want to go glass half empty, you look at this and say the Flames aren't a good hockey team. We need to be able to put them away. The fact that not only could we not put them away, the fact that we blew a multiple goal lead and then couldn't find a game winner in spite of the fact we were pushing hard, in spite of the fact we had game control, I think that's a reasonable critique. But as we've been saying, it is only one game. There's a lot of hockey left to be played. There are a lot of talented players on this Oilers team who had pretty good games tonight. I was really impressed with what I saw from Alec Regula, somebody who didn't really play for much of the last season and a half. I was pretty impressed with a lot of the newer faces like Tomasek. And frankly, I was very happy with what I got from Kapanen and Podkolzin. I would like to see a little bit more dangerous offense. I think your chances of creating dangerous offense are a little more limited when you play Connor and Leon together. But the Oilers played, I would say, a C-plus game tonight, and they got to the 8th round of the shootout against a team that was 1 point out of a playoff spot last year. That's pretty good. And I think the last real point I wanted to make before we sign off for the day, good NHL teams find ways to win games where they're not at their best. Great teams can win with a C-plus, and it requires personal discipline to not rely on that C-plus effort being good enough. It becomes incumbent upon you to play well enough all of the time that on the occasion you need to fall back on that C-plus game. You can pull it out, you can win, and you can feel good about it. It ties back to what we had said before, that over the course of 82 regular season games and 4 playoff rounds, every guy on your team is going to need to have a moment at some point. Those ideas are interconnected, but that will just about do it for this opening night loss edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everybody who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, FanDuel. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.